Good afternoon and welcome to our online ethical debate research project for SPCE619, section 808. Today's ethical dilemma in applied behavior analysis explores the question, should neurodiversity affirming practices and identity affirming language be fully adopted as the ethical standard of care in behavior analysis? This topic challenges how we define effective care, dignity, and professionalism in our field. The debate today is about balance between scientific integrity and human dignity, between data and lived experience. The pro team will argue that neurodiversity affirming practices and disability language are essential to ethical care. They believe these practices promote dignity, cultural responsiveness, and authentic inclusion by viewing behavior as meaningful communication rather than pathology. In contrast, the con team will argue that full adoption without standardized definitions or empirical grounding risks confusion, inconsistency, and harm to clients. This debate ties directly to ethical principles outlined by the Behavior Analyst Certification Board, or the BACB, code such as Code 1.07 on cultural responsiveness and diversity, Code 2.13 on selecting and implementing assessments, and Code 3.01 on responsibility to clients. These emphasize dignity, competence, and evidence-based care. Today's discussion will explore what it means to uphold these standards in real-world practice. Our format will include opening statements from both teams, followed by a cross-examination, rebuttals, and closing arguments, or closing remarks. The total time for our debate is 40 minutes, allowing each participant to fully develop their perspective, while maintaining balance and respect. Representing the pro team is Portia Snowden and Rachel Knight. Representing the con team are Aisha Forson and Melody Allison. I am Desiree Pittman, your moderator. Let's begin with Portia, who will present the opening argument for the affirmative team.
Thank you, Desiree. Our team stands firmly in the affirmative. The full adoption of neurodiversity affirming practices is essential for ethical care. The traditional deficit model of ABA has too often been rooted in systematic ableism, teaching people to appear normal rather than helping them thrive authentically. By contrast, a neurodiversity affirming model recognizes that behavior is communication. Every action, every gesture, every so-called problem behavior tells a story about unmet needs, environmental barriers, or personal expressions. Our first point, affirming practices create an ethical foundation by reframing behavior as communication. Instead of pathologizing individuals for behaviors that differ from the norm, we seek to understand what those behaviors mean. For example, when a child repeatedly avoids a task, traditional ABA might label that as escape behavior, but an affirming approach might uncover that the child feels overstimulated or that the task is culturally irrelevant. When we interpret behavior as communication, we uphold the client's dignity and align with our ethical mandate to act in their best interest as stated in Code 3.01. Second, affirming practices promote empowerment and mental health. Research and lived experience show that when individuals are accepted for who they are rather than pressured to conform, they experience less anxiety, greater engagement, and a stronger long-term outcomes. Using identity affirming language reinforces that acceptance, choosing to say autistic person rather than person with autism if that individual's preference, for example, honors self-identity and autonomy. This directly supports cultural responsiveness as required by Code 1.08 by validating each person's lived experience. Finally, This approach ensures ethical treatment through inclusion and collaboration. Families, caregivers, and clients become active participants in assessments and intervention decisions. Descriptive assessments, interviews, and observations replace impersonal experimental setups, ensuring that interventions respect both cultural and individuality. This is what it means to be both data informed and dignity driven. In short, neurodiversity affirming care doesn't reject science. It refines it, making science serve people, not the other way around.
Thank you. Now we will hear from Aisha for the con team.
Thank you, Desiree. I would recognize the good intention behind neurodiversity affirming practice. Our team stand firmly in the negative. The full uncritical adoption of these practices without standardized definition, clear trainings, guidelines, or empirical validation poses serious ethical and professional risks. Our first concern is clarity. The term neurodiversity affirming is inspiring but vague. Different professionals interpret it in different ways, and without shared definition, it's impossible to ensure consistency or accountability. For example, one practitioner may emphasize language choices while another changes entire assessment protocol. This inconsistency can confuse family and lead to intervention that vary widely in quality. From an ethical perspective, lack of clarity undermines informed consent, Code 2.1.11. And can erode public trust in our field. Our second concern is that rapid adoption could compromise safety and effectiveness. Ethical behavior analysts are required to rely on empirically supported intervention and to stay within their scope of competence, Code 1.05. Without sufficient research or standardized method, we risk adapting practices that sound compassionate but have not been proven effective. Compassionate without competence can be dangerous. We cannot ethically provide treatment that feel good but lack evidence to ensure it truly benefits the clients. So we agree that dignity and respect are essential, but those values must rest on a stable foundation of clear, validated, and replicable practice. Until affirming frameworks are better defined, widespread adoption risks turning information into confusion, where good intention leads to harm. Our responsibility as professionals is to proceed with both compassion and caution.
Thank you both. We will now move into our cross-examination period. Each team will have 2 minutes to respond to the opposing side's ethical challenge. So our question for the pro team. Critics warn that inconsistency in terminology and practice could lead to confusion or harm. How can affirming practices ensure accountability and consistency without a rigid, standardized model? And then our question for the con team will be, the pro side argues that deficit-based models often neglect the lived experience and identity of clients. How can care be truly ethical if it fails to center the client's humanity and cultural context? Teams, you may now begin your responses.
Thank you, Desiree. The con team raises an important point about clarity, but I'd argue that fear of ambiguity should never justify keeping systems that no longer serve our clients or our science. Affirming practice isn't a rejection of scientific standards. It's the evolution of them. By science, by nature, grows through refinement. As behavior analysts, we constantly update our methods based on new data and ethical insight. This movement simply challenges us to refine our work in ways that uphold human dignity alongside empirical integrity. When we center client dignity in evidence-based practice, we don't weaken the science, we strengthen it. We make our field more accurate, more humane, and more sustainable. Accountability doesn't mean avoiding innovation, it simply means handling it with precision. It means documenting our decisions, training staff thoroughly, and collaborating transparently so that progress remains both ethical and data-driven. Affirming practice already sets a higher bar for ethical reflection and data transparency. It demands that we examine not only what works, but for whom and at what cost. We can achieve clarity through research, through shared definitions, and through practice, just as trauma-informed care once did when it first entered the conversation. Ultimately, progress in our field has always required courage. It takes courage to question old models, to adapt, and to lead with compassion without losing scientific rigor. Affirming practice is simply the next step in that evolution, a reminder that good science and good ethics must grow together.
Thank you, Rachel. The pros team's optimism is admirable, but ethics demand caution when clients' welfare is on the line. Dignity cannot exist without safety, and affirming practices without clarity risk misinterpretation and harm. If behavior analysis are unsure of what affirming even means, how can we ensure consistent outcomes? Until affirming models have structure and standardized testing, widespread implementation would be premature and potentially unethical. True ethical evolution happens through evidence and collaboration. We support developing these practices, but responsibility through research, not rhetoric.
Now we will answer some questions from the audience. Our first question is for Portia. How do affirming practices improve treatment outcomes compared to traditional ABA?
That was a great question. Thank you. Affirming practices improve outcomes by fostering trust, autonomy, and self-advocacy. When individuals feel respected and understood rather than treated for deficits, they are more engaged and cooperative in therapy. Descriptive, dignity-based assessments reduce cohesion, build rapport, and increase generalization of skills. Research also shows that culturally and identity responsive practices enhance treatment adherence and long-term quality of life, not just short-term behavior.
So Portia, I do have a follow-up question. So can you tell me one way that you would build rapport with a client?
So a way that I would build rapport with a client would be asking them questions about things that they like, things that they enjoy. Asking, for example, if it was the parent, what do they like to do with their child? If it was a teacher, what are some activities that even the teacher does? What are some ways that we can help support them? I think that building that rapport is very critical. And I think that just really identifying areas of individualization for each person that you're trying to build a rapport with will really enhance that relationship.
Nice. Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any follow-up questions on that one?
Yes, actually. So I was wondering, so I understand that there's two approaches to ABA. There's what they call DTT and NET. Can you explain those a little bit more for me?
Yes.
So the
Oh, go ahead.
yeah, so the biggest difference between DTT and NET, which those stand for discrete trial training, and NET stands for natural environment training or teaching. Some people say training, some people say teaching. And the biggest difference is your environment. DTT is going to be more so structured. Natural environment teaching is more in the like DTT is going to be structured at a table. Net is more so in the environment, or like opportunity based, if that makes sense. All right, cool. Well, Rachel, actually, we'll hop on over to you. I have a next question from the audience. So, what happens if professionals can't agree on the meaning of affirming?
Man, that sounds pretty typical. I mean, name something that everyone agrees on, right? So
Right.
disagreement, right? So disagreement on terminology, it can create a couple things like confusion, inconsistency of care, and then it highlights the need for clear operational definitions and shared ethical grounding. So we all want, through the use of an operational definition, um, everything just to be thoroughly explained. Um, and then when affirming is not when affirming isn't clearly defined, it's really hard to know what it is. So that risks it being applied superficially. And the solution lies in ongoing professional dialogue and aligning all of the interventions with either, the ethics code for behavior analysts. So that ensures that affirming practices remain evidence-based and measurable, not ideological.
Awesome. Thank you for answering that question for our audience member. I actually have another one for you, Rachel. So, do inspirational media portrayals reduce stigma or make it worse? What do you think?
It's a pretty hot debate. So actually they can do both. Positive stories increase visibility and it can challenge, they can challenge outdated stereotypes. But those typical inspiration narratives, they often imply that a disability has to, it's something to be overcome, it's a challenge, and it has to be hard for it to be valuable, right? So this unintentionally reinforces ableism and it sets unrealistic expectations for those, either, whichever term that you want to use. But balanced representation, showing neurodivergent people living ordinary and authentic lives, it does more to normalize diversity and reduces stigma that exaggerated instead of those exaggerated hero depictions.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, we have a another audience question. So, Portia, I'll let you take this one. How can therapists balance dignity with evidence-based treatment?
So that was also a good question. I would say balancing dignity with data means integrating compassion with competence. Therapists should start with descriptive, person-centered assessments that honor identity and context, then apply empirically supported methods tailored to those findings. Ethical codes such as 1.07 on cultural responsiveness and 2.13 on selecting assessments require that interventions both respect clients' dignity and meet evidence standards. The two are complementary, they are not conflicting.
Thank you, Portia. We have another audience question. Aisha, what safeguards prevent affirming practices from becoming tokenistic?
That's actually a good question. So there are a few safeguards that is put in place to prevent that from happening. And one of those could be ongoing cultural humility training and reflective supervision to address biases. Because as a provider or BCBA, bias is something that you always need to work on, whether it's ongoing training to make sure you're giving client services that's not based on your biased feelings or your biased thought. And another step could be documenting how a framing principle shape measurable goals and not just language. A third step could be collaborating with clients and family in goals, selection, and consent. You want to make sure your clients and their family feel part of this journey or whatever goals you're creating for the clients. And another thing could be peer review and data monitoring to ensure a framing intervention remain effective. These steps protect against performative information and maintain accountability.
Thank you, Aisha. I also have another question from the audience for you. How do we measure the success of affirming practices in real-world settings?
The audience seems to have a lot of questions tonight, huh? Okay. That's a good question. That's another good question. So success is measured through both quantitative and qualitative data. So behavioral outcome like skills acquisition, reduction in distress signal, and some could be social validity written from client and caregiver. Increasing engagement, independence, and self-advocacy could be something as well. And another success could be report of improved well-being and decreased stigma. So combining client vote with data create a holistic picture of effectiveness aligned with ethical and cultural standards.
Thank you, Aisha. So we have time for two more audience questions. So Melody, I'm going to go over to you. What risks come from removing established ABA methods too quickly?
Okay. Thanks for that question. So rapidly discarding established ABA methods can lead to a loss of proven effective strategies, especially since ABA is a data-driven science. So if we remove those before adequate replacements exist, that's a huge risk. It can compromise safety, increase problem behaviors, and reduce treatment fidelity. So ethical practice requires a gradual integration of new approaches. Also making sure that those new approaches are also based in data and in science, while expanding methods to be more affirming and inclusive.
Thank you, Melody. So we'll move to our last audience question of the night. So Melody, how should families respond to mixed messages about disability language? And I think we have a lot of family members in the audience today. So this will be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So as families, they should definitely approach language through curiosity, respect, and individual preference. So asking, their loved one, their child, the most ethical response is to ask them how they wish to be identified and to honor that choice instead of going with what other people think. They should also seek guidance from professionals that are familiar with both neurodiversity and as well as ABA ethics. Remembering that language evolves as well, but overall the goal is consistent, that we want them to feel dignity, inclusion, and just have an overall authentic representation.
Thank you so much to everyone who answered questions. Thanks to all of our participants for this thoughtful exchange. So I'm going to go into our closing remarks. The pro team emphasized that affirming practices promote dignity, cultural responsiveness, and authentic inclusion. The con team reminded us that clarity, accountability, and empirical validation are the bedrock of ethical care. Ultimately, our challenge as professionals is to unite compassion with competence, to honor identity while maintaining specific integrity. All right, so we're going to go into some visuals to show you. Portia, if you want to share that with everyone.
Absolutely. All right, is everyone able to see our
Yes.
visuals? Okay. I'm sorry. I'm going to try one more time. Okay. This will allow me to. All right. Is everyone able to see the Visuals Pro?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, excellent.
Yes.
So this first chart is a comparison of assessment approaches. So this is assessment approaches of descriptive versus functional. On a scale rating of 0 to 100. And descriptive, as you see, represents green and functional represents yellow. So in relation to context and cultural sensitivity, the descriptive assessment approaches rate much higher. For risk of cohesion, the functional approach rates higher. For the family assessment preference, for families preferring functional assessment first, they were only at 25%. And families who prefer descriptive first, they were at 65%. And for families who had no preference, that was a minimal amount of 10%. And another visual for the pro was behavior as communication mind map. So with behavior being at the center, you can also see the functions, tangible, escape, attention, and sensory. Moving on, we will go over the visuals for the con.
All right, so in this visual here, it is going over the key takeaway of the con side. So there are 8 key takeaways. The first one is to respect the unique neurodiversity of each client and do not make goals or interventions to change those characteristics. We want to leave our kids, love them as they are, you know. Our key takeaway number 2 is to focus goal areas on well-being and positive engagement versus compliance. Our third key takeaway is that non-autistic therapists should seek out autistic social rules and styles of communication. Number 4 is to consult with neurodivergent individuals to understand the meaning behind the behavior. Maybe they would be able to help. Key takeaway number 5 is to think of behaviors as natural responses to the environment, not something that is compliant or non-compliant. Behaviors are normal. They happen for everyone. what we're doing right now is a behavior. Watching this debate is a behavior. Number 6 is to respect autistic individuals to move their bodies as they see fit. Don't restrict them. Just let, if they want to move their body up, sideways, this way, that way, that's okay. We don't want to, again, restrict their bodies, and we want to give them respect. Number 7 would be all forms of communication should be honored. So whether that, be vocal communication or any other type of verbal communication, whether that's, via text, AAC device, any way that they are communicating with you, all of those should be honored, even if those are maladaptive behaviors. They are telling you something. Our eighth and final takeaway are that therapists should be aware of the differences in their own understanding of behavioral norms. All right, and then the next visual that we have. So the visual on the left is describing pretty much what all needs to be encompassed within neurodiversity affirming practice. It needs to include, it needs to promote autonomy. It needs to respect all forms of communication. It needs, requires us to be informed by neurodivergent voices and to presume competence. It also requires us to tailor supports to individual needs. And lastly, honor neurodivergent culture. And then we have the visual on the right. So this is showing the clarity of definition and like the clarity versus effectiveness and actually how effective they were. So the red is the unclear affirming practices, and then the blue is the evidence-based practices. And clearly the evidence-based practice is going to be much higher in effectiveness rather than our unclear affirming practice.
All right. So this debate, the last thing I want to mention is this debate highlights that ethical care in ABA is not a choice between empathy and evidence. It is the integration of both. And we are going to conclude on that note. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.